Hey y'all, welcome to Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. I'm Mandy. I'm just a mom sitting down having real conversations with real Texas parents about what's going on across our great state. Today, I am so honored to be joined by Senator Mayes Middleton. Senator Middleton is a father of 4, married to Macy, and he's here to talk all things about what's going on in our schools, what's going on with our property taxes, and how you can fight back. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me on, Mandy, today. Appreciate it.
So glad to finally have you here because you've been in the battle against these policies for over 7 years as a legislator, but really for more than 20 that you've been involved at the foundation and fighting for Texans, fighting for women, fighting for parents. So let's just dive into what you're working on right now. Right now, we're in the middle of a special session. We just came out of the 89th legislative session where you have been a leader in the parent empowerment movement for education savings accounts, but what are you focused on right now?
Well, obviously, school choice has always been a big priority of mine. And I was involved in the public policy world, grassroots activist. I've shown up to the fight for years to help fight to get our conservative values into action and into law. And one of the biggest fights that we've got in the legislature is the ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying. And that is where your local property tax dollars, about $100 million per year, are being used to hire Austin lobbyists, fat cat Austin lobbyists that are up and down Congress Avenue here in Austin, to lobby against you and lobby against your conservative values. And I'll be honest, this is a way that the left gets their way without winning elections, because they're able to stop the conservative values and the conservative legislation that we believe in with our own tax dollars.
Right.
Which is why it's so outrageous that our own dollars are being used to lobby against us.
So we're seeing a huge groundswell of great Texans rising up and trying to fight back against taxpayer-funded lobbying. But you also hear some that have been fed misinformation, usually by the very same taxpayer-funded lobbyists that make millions of dollars out of their community. But can we go back a little bit and explain how this works? Because you hit the nail on the head. We have a republic, right? We elect, your district elects you to come and serve and represent them. I imagine your local officials have your email, your cell phone. They can reach out to you. So how does taxpayer-funded, what does it mean and what does it look like?
Well, so first of all, the rights belong to the people.
Yes.
And not the government. It's that simple. That's how a constitutional republic is supposed to work. So there's, that's one of the foundations of it. But then we are all elected by the same people, whether you're a city council member or a county commissioner or a school board member.
Or just a mom.
Those are the same voters voting for state representatives and state senators.
Yeah.
And the bottom line is we don't need a taxpayer-funded middleman between your local elected officials and your state elected officials. And these lobbyists, they live and work in Austin. They've probably never been to these communities, especially these rural communities.
Yeah.
They don't even know where they are most of the time. And they're claiming to represent them here, but they really don't. They represent Austin values pretty well. I'll say that, but they don't represent the values of the rest of Texas.
That's right. They don't. And they don't represent... Sometimes they do represent the values of big government entities, big government representatives, even elected officials, even in rural areas, those that want to be able to tax more to put their influence and their interests. But the reality is that you, as an elected official, ultimately should be responsive to those who elect you, right?
Right. That's right.
And that's kind of where I think that a lot of people miss this, especially when they're saying, well, rural communities won't have a voice. The whole point is that you are supposed to be their voice, not a taxpayer-funded lobbyist that, as you said, doesn't show up or might show up once a year for some report or whatever. They live, to be clear, in multi-million-dollar homes here in Austin. They make multi-million dollars a year off of taxpayers, and they're advocating for government, not for people. Is that
right?
That's kind of how it works.
And that's the key distinction there, is because, look, if you don't like Bud Light and what they stand for, don't buy Bud Light.
Yeah.
If you don't like Target and what they stand for, don't shop at Target. But if you don't like what your local government is lobbying on or against, quit paying your taxes and what happens, right? Someone could take your home or your business. It's forced speech. You are being forced to subsidize positions you don't believe in and are against your values, your Christian values, your conservative values. And a lot of this stuff is frankly anti-Texan.
That's right.
Right? I mean, so you think of some of the things that they're pushing, like, men and women's restrooms. They're against election integrity. They're against border security. The list goes on. They're for critical race theory and DEI. I mean, these are things that are not just, bad for local government. They're bad for our state. And we cannot allow them and stand for that, especially when your own tax dollars are being used to advance the radical left's agenda. And this is pretty simple here. The ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying defunds the deep state, it drains the Austin swamp, and it ends the USAID of Texas.
That's right. Amen. And that's what we have to do. The left can't win elections, so they go hire lobbyists. That's basically what happens.
That's exactly right. I mean, you see it all the time where, good example, this session, I'm also carrying special session, the Women's Privacy Act, right? And so what that does is that keeps men out of women's private spaces like restrooms, locker rooms, showers, family violence shelters, jails, other private facilities that are dedicated spaces for women. And unfortunately, your tax dollars have been used to lobby against that. So Texas Association of School Boards was against that. And then last session, when I carried the bill in the regular session, County Judges and Commissioners Association of Texas was against the bill.
What? Okay, so TASB, Texas Association of School Boards, which I will say it again, stain on education. They absolutely should not be lobbying. One of their top lobbyists has taken nearly or upwards of $500,000 from Texas. His name's Thomas Ratliff. I will not hide it because he is advocating against banning drag shows for children. But you're talking about other taxpayer-funded entities that are opposing protecting women and girls.
And there is a huge incentive to lie by these lobbyists, right? Because their paycheck is at risk. So I ask everybody, do you think they have some kind of incentive to lie about this bill because they're not going to get paid anymore by these? Of course, there's a huge incentive.
Right.
And there's also a huge incentive to not tell or disclose who they're representing, what they're really doing in Austin. So that's a great example with County Judges and Commissioners Association of Texas. They claim to represent some of the more rural counties. These are the type of counties that are voting 80, 90% for Trump, right?
Right.
Very conservative.
Deep red.
Well, then why on earth would an association like that lobby against a bill that kept men out of women's private spaces, right? Why would they protect men that are pretending to be women at the expense of actual women, at the expense of the safety of our daughters? This is basic common sense. And I'll tell you, at the end of the day, this is one of the best examples of how unethical it is that our tax dollars are being used against us.
And so we understand, these lobbyists, when you're talking about the associations, what they do is they go hire people from Texas that have been here in Austin. Oftentimes, they're former legislators or high-level staffers,
that's true, yeah.
right? There's this revolving door that comes out. You put your time in, and then you come out and make millions off the taxpayers' back, right? So they're going and they hire them. Why would they? What is their reasoning? So they go hire taxpayer-funded lobbyists and say, here's our money from a rural community or just 90% of Texas that holds the same values that you and I do. There's, men and women are different. Men should not be able to invade women's spaces. Parents should be in charge of their child's education. Yeah. All these just fundamental basic rights that we believe in. And so, but they go hire someone. And what is the logic? What were they saying? What's a lie? What's an example of what they come in front of you when you are there and they're testifying? What's an example of what they say to try and support a position of any of this nonsense that nobody in rural Texas would ever support?
Right. I mean, like a good example is they would say that border security laws, right, are laws to make sure that we combat illegal immigration are unfunded mandates. The same thing that they said about the Women's Privacy Act. I'm like, well, our laws against murder are unfunded mandates. Should we repeal those? I mean, it's complete nonsense, and they're actually not, I believe they're not telling who they represent what their actual position is.
Right.
I think if you went to rural county commissioners and county judges, they would have no clue that association actually opposed the Women's Privacy Act, right? I think there are very few that know that. In addition, their head lobbyist gives to Act Blue, right?
What is Act Blue?
So Act Blue is the primary funding mechanism full of fraud for Democrats. That's how Democrats raise money. Act Blue is actually under, I believe, federal investigation right now, where they were putting people's names down as donating to Act Blue, and these people hadn't actually donated. So this is a huge issue. It's filled with corruption, and it shows you the ideology of some of these lobbyists where they claim to represent, rural Texas values.
Right.
But how can you do that when you're donating to Act Blue, which is the primary funding mechanism for the left?
That's right.
And for Democrats.
That's exactly right. Something else that you're kind of hitting on that I hope that Texans realize is that when you are a taxpayer-funded lobbyist, it's not like you're just representing a community, Galveston or whatever. You're not just representing them. You can go on Transparency USA and see there is a whole list of communities and private business. You want to talk about how crony capitalism has gotten out of control, how that government is absolutely able to put their thumb on the scale. That's what these taxpayer-funded lobbyists do. And private industry go and seek out the lobbyists representing communities because then they're going to pull. Then they're going to be able to use their influence. I know that Representative Hillary Hicklin was talking about the lobbyists in her community, taxpayer-funded lobbyists, also represent Walmart. And when the community was saying, please get obscene materials out of eye level of children at Walmart, sexually defined in code, obscene materials. And their lobbyist was representing Walmart, who didn't want to move stuff and actually fought against her. And so that's just one example of how you can't serve two masters. You either serve the people of Texas or you serve those that would seek the power, control, and the money that's often coming out of Texans' pockets.
Right. And that's a great example where I've seen it a million times where these lobbyists are saying they represent, these local government entities, but they're also representing someone else against them.
Right.
And at the end of the day, I don't think that they really care because if they get fired, they'll just go find another client. And it also, I'll tell you, it hurts rural Texans too because they're having to compete against the big blue counties that can hire as many registered lobbyists as they want. And this will actually, I believe, if we ban taxpayer-funded lobbying, it will increase the voice of rural Texas, but will also increase the voice of our voters that are electing all of us, because I've seen it in committee a million times where someone sacrifices to be here, right?
Yes.
They're here in the Capitol because they believe in a particular issue or they're against a particular bill, for or against it, and they've taken the day off work. They've had to find childcare for their son or their daughter. It's a huge sacrifice. They've driven a long way. No one's paying them to be there.
Right.
They're only there because they believe in it. And then you see a lobbyist that they've had to pay for against them, right? So they're having to subsidize their own opposition when they have just sacrificed to be here. No one's paying them to be here.
Right.
But then they're having to pay the person that's against them.
You've
and
talked
so
about
it will
a mother.
increase the voice, increase the voice.
Yeah, and I remember you talking about a mother. You've talked about this. You watched her come in and testify for her child. She was not paid. She drove him for a long way. And then right behind her, I think you said was it the TASB, taxpayer-funded lobbyist, or somebody else? But you've shared that story before. Could you share that about watching a parent make these sacrifices and having a taxpayer-funded lobbyist that she paid for?
It's unbelievable, but this is in 2017, and it's really when I first became aware of just how bad this issue is and just how wrong it is.
Yeah.
This is fundamentally unethical, and so this is, I believe, SB 3. It was a school choice bill in the Senate Education Committee, and I watched moms drive up, from all over Texas.
Yeah.
And one particular mom, and she said, please pass this bill. Please give my child this chance. I can't afford the kind of education that I know my child needs. I believe she had special needs. I believe it was some issues, and I don't really recall all the details of it.
Sure.
But she was asking for that chance. Please give me this chance. Please give me this choice. And then not long after she testified, there was a taxpayer-funded lobbyist that lobbied against school choice, against that parent. And really what they were against is letting a mom or a dad decide what's best for their child.
That's right.
They're against parental rights. I mean, and then we had a bill this session and last session as well. And it said if a child has been groomed or sexually abused, then that child gets public school choice or private school choice, right? So open enrollment or private school choice. Well, the taxpayer-funded lobbyists were against that bill. In other words, what they were doing, they were lobbying to trap children in that situation that they're groomed or sexually abused in. And that's just fundamentally wrong. You see that a lot in the Capitol. I guarantee you they are not telling that story to the districts they claim to represent. And then you also think about how they represent both sides, going back to earlier where there are a lot of districts that pay Robin Hood, into Robin Hood, right? Chapter 49. There are some districts that receive Robin Hood. How can association represent both sides?
Right.
The ones paying into Robin Hood don't want to do that anymore. The ones receiving it want to continue receiving Robin Hood. So how can you really claim to be the best advocate and representative to both sides of that equation? Well, you can't.
Right.
You can't.
You can't. That's exactly right. Something else that is really big that everybody is talking about is the out of control property taxes. Real quick, let's establish a baseline. Does the legislature levy any property taxes?
The legislature does not levy any property taxes. We do determine how they are levied. And of course, we've seen again and again, every time we propose property tax relief or reform, guess who is lobbying against that? Taxpayer-funded lobbyists.
That's right.
Government doesn't have any money. It's all taxpayer money. It's all our money.
That's right.
And they're using our money to lobby against us to get more of it. And we've seen this again and again and again. Obviously, 2019 was a big fight. That was the voter-approved limit. Yep. So the 3.5% limit that with SB2. And that's just a voter-approved threshold. So when the lobbyists were against that bill with your own tax dollars, what they were really against is the voters having a say if their property taxes went up or not.
That's right.
And that's a great example of, look, we're a constitutional republic, and when they're lobbying to deny voters a say in something, it shows you the magnitude of the problem that we've got with this issue.
It is, and something I want to point out. So I wanted that baseline because I think a lot of people you all have the responsibility to set the laws and the guidelines and the way that they operate, but it is the local jurisdictions. We're talking your ISDs, which is the biggest entity that is levying the property taxes. In fact, across Texas, we have over $200 billion in debt.
Local debt, yeah.
In local debt for school districts alone. Then you throw on top of that our municipal debt, and we're over $500 billion, $500 billion in debt at the local level. And that's why we're seeing this uprising. Look, we're building, Crowley ISD is building a $150 million track and field stadium. And I can remember it was all the commercials, Friday Night Lights shutting off, right? When we were talking about empowering parents with choices, that somehow this would destroy Friday Night Lights. We're not even talking about a football stadium, which they're just as bad, $100 million and plus for football stadiums. This is a track and field stadium for $150 million that taxpayers are now on the hook for. And the problem is that most of them don't realize, first off, how much it's going to cost them when they either show up at the ballot box or that they don't, because a lot of people are not making that connection, unfortunately. But you've got the lobbyists up here. I know Texas Association of School Boards, TASB, lobbies against telling the voters they don't want uniform voting dates, meaning they don't want them set in November. They like the 6-month schedule, and they don't want to tell you per, $100,000 of valuation, this is what this will cost you. Just so you know, taxpayer, you're taking out a debt, a bond is debt, you're borrowing money, and this is what it'll cost you. And that's where this issue all goes together, because it's these lobbyists that are up here fighting to stop the reforms, right?
That's right.
that then affects the local property taxes and the structure and the way that taxpayers actually see and know what things will cost them before they're voting on it.
Well, so that's a great example. You know, I mean, $500 billion. You think of those numbers, $200 billion for school districts. That's, I think, about $35,000 per child, a tremendous amount of debt. And then just simple transparency they fight against. So, you know, I had legislation this session where right now only the principal is on the ballot. I said, okay, well, let's put the interest on the ballot too. Obviously, we know interest rates are pretty high.
Yeah.
That $100 million bond may actually be $200 million when you include the interest in it. And they lobbied against that.
Right.
So they're lobbying to hide from taxpayers how much these bonds really cost.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of the reason why this has gotten so out of control is anytime we're proposing limits on that and limits on property taxes, reasonable limits, they're against it.
Yep.
And they're using your tax dollars to fight and to kill legislation like that is very pro-taxpayer, it's pro-transparency. And the worst part is they're fighting to hide these things from our taxpayers.
Can you imagine going to purchase a house? You know, we've all worked with a real estate agent before, and you see a home and you say, I want to go see that home, and it's listed at $300,000 or whatever it is. Can you imagine if you went and saw a home and they said, you owe $300,000 and this is all, and not even tell you what your monthly payment is going to be? Can you imagine if you didn't know? But not even just that, not including the TI. You've got, you know, the principal and interest. They don't even want to show the interest, but principal, interest, taxes, and insurance.
That's right.
That's what people are paying in monthly. Can you imagine, can any homeowner imagine if you went to purchase something and you were not given that information to make an informed decision? That would be crazy.
It would be insane to go get a mortgage and then say, please don't tell me the interest rate.
Right.
I mean,
or my final monthly payment.
Nobody would do that. But that's what the taxpayer-funded lobbyists are saying. Don't tell them the interest rate.
That's right.
Don't put it on the ballot.
And don't have so also when you go get a mortgage, you turn over every bit of financial information and they calculate a debt to income ratio and say, just because your real estate agent said you can afford this house based on your debt, you can afford this because here's what your total payment is going to be. There's a debt to income ratio, but is there any debt to revenue limitation at our local government level? I mean, is there any sort of limitation of what they can borrow?
No, and I've proposed that before. Of course, they fought it tooth and nail.
Yeah.
You know, for example, my proposal was a limit on how much debt they could have per student.
Yep.
Because right now it's Katie bar the door, whatever they want. That's the limit. The sky's the limit. There's no limit.
It's over $40,000 per student in debt. I'm not talking about what we're spending, which is over $18,000 per student. In fact, last year's numbers came out. In public schools, we spent $100 billion, and which comes out to $18,125 per kid. On top of that, every child in our public school has about $40,000 of a debt attached to them.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're actually reverse engineering this where Texas Association of School Boards is the main taxpayer-funded lobbying group for schools, and then they have their preferred vendors.
Yep.
And then you have to go to their conference because, by law, you have to have these continuing education hours as a school board trustee. So then they've got you hostage.
They make it real enticing,
and
though.
Then they introduce you to their preferred vendors at these conferences.
Yep.
And then these preferred vendors tell you how much debt you can issue without destroying your credit rating. And then in the next booth is the architecture firm or the construction firm. And the whole package is designed essentially to come up with these bond projects and pass them. And, one of the things that we saw several years ago was revealed as one of the metrics of success that TASB had for superintendents was their ability to pass bonds.
That's right.
Their ability to pile on local government debt to taxpayers and how successful they were at piling that debt on to taxpayers.
Right. And so I've seen this too. So just so our viewers know, it's also because TASB has an executive search arm. They are placing these school districts. If you ever see kind of where there's a problem in a district and a superintendent is let go, it's being moved to another school district. And on almost every single bio is exactly that: what bonds they passed, because it benefits them. And it benefits, you said it, the architecture, engineering, construction firms, which that leads us into another part of this problem. They are the ones that are funding the bond packages. And that's really important, or the bond campaign. So you can go onto Transparency USA.
That's right.
And you can put in any of these massive architecture firms that are preferred vendors listed from TASB's website, helping sponsor casino nights or football party nights at these conferences that are taking place, by the way, at Kalahari Water Park, at JW Marriott Water Park. I mean, they make it real fun. Lost Pines, that has a water park. It's like, come bring your kids, come have a party. And in the evenings, we'll entertain you and give you prizes. And here's our preferred vendors. Those preferred vendors are the ones that fund the political action committees, or PACs. You can see all of this laid out. And then somehow, I'm using air quotes, somehow, then you go back and look, and they're also the ones that are receiving the massive multi-million-dollar contracts. We dug into this here at the foundation, and we're seeing that some of these contractors, for every $1 they put in the political action committee, the PAC, to fund the bond packages, upwards of $15,000 return for every $1 invested.
Wow.
That is insane.
Wow. And these are TASB preferred vendors.
These are TASB preferred vendors.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, essentially, where they come up with the project or help you come up with the project, and then they pay for the advocacy. They pay for the PAC to get the bond passed, and then they benefit from the proceeds of it. Massively.
Can you imagine, for every $1 you invested in something, you receive $15,000 in return?
Well, and they're really not making that money. It's all taxpayer money.
That's it.
That's levied by property taxes.
And that's where it is. It is incredibly, it's just a nefarious web. I call it the cartel because it's all interconnected and equally as bad as just absolutely devastating Texans with out of control property taxes to fund these very elaborate, completely ostentatious, out of control facilities, which has gone, unchecked, is that they lock arms with the far left ideologues. I'm talking Pastors for Texas Children, Texas Freedom Network, AFT, American Federation for Teachers. I'm talking the far leftist organizations that testify against parents, that fight against transparency, that fight to keep porn in our libraries. They are all interconnected in this nasty little unholy alliance, I guess is the best way to put it, because the more kids that they can keep captive, the bigger the buildings, the more that they can, claim we need to build this, we need to pass this bond. And the more kids that the left, they're okay with these profiteers in the cartel because they want children locked in the seats to indoctrinate them.
Well, and we've seen it, obviously that group, this kind of left-wing orbit.
Yep.
And that's why I call it the USAID of Texas, because it is.
Yes.
And they're the ones that were against putting chaplains in schools, right? So I passed that bill last session. And this session, I passed the bill to put prayer back in our public schools during school hours. And I'm waiting for it. I guarantee you there's going to be some sort of legal advice that's going to come down the pipeline, as to why they shouldn't do that.
That's right.
And we saw it when Joe Biden was trying to push his radical Title IX agenda on our public schools. There were these legal guidance documents that TASB put out, and basically it was, here's a list of 100 bad things that could happen to you if you don't follow this Title IX order, and then nothing good. Yep. And then school districts like Tyler ISD did the right thing. They said that's unconstitutional. We're going to follow Governor Abbott's directive that there are only two sexes, male and female. We're not going to let a boy in a little girl's shower or locker room. We're not going to let a boy play girls' sports. And they said, TASB, will you defend us? And they said, no, we'll wait for a court. We're not defending you now.
TASB said, no, we will not defend you, even though one of their selling points is that they will defend you legally against lawsuits. So the dirty little secret is that what they'll tell you is the ACLU will come sue, right?
That's exactly what they said. Yeah, the ACLU, which of course we know wanted child gender modification, right? The ACLU wanted chemical and surgical child gender mutilation is really the best way to put it, and that's child abuse.
Yeah.
And that's what the ACLU stands for.
That's right. It is. And they partner with the American Federation of Teachers and the NEA, TSTA, which is all of these radical leftist ideologues that have taken captive the education system in far too many places. And you've been at the forefront of leading to stop them getting a foothold here in Texas with those radical ideas.
And our schools are not God-free zones. I mean, that's what they're trying to do.
Right.
And so that's why that bill was so important to reestablish those religious liberties in our public schools.
Yeah.
But this is basically the story of the left. They're saying that it's dangerous to display the Ten Commandments. It's dangerous to have prayer in our public schools, but it's just fine to have pornography in the libraries or expose children to obscene materials. And that shows you just how far the left has gone to hurt our children and really expose them to things that are wrong for under 18. I mean, it's unbelievable some of the things that we've seen happen.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that that's a good point when they talk about the Ten Commandments, having even parables and proverbs and different stories that would make you a well-read, well-educated person. But let's go back even further, just to our founding documents. And I'm a passionate believer that we have got to focus and improve our history and social studies standards, because kids do not understand the Judeo-Christian values out of the Old and New Testament that really were the foundation for the Declaration of Independence and our legal system. And that is crucial. And when the left is talking about removing all of these values that we have held dear and, quite frankly, that's made America the greatest, most successful, most benevolent country that's ever existed, it's because of the foundations. And that's what the left is trying to lead.
That we protect our God-granted freedoms.
That's right.
You know, as it says in the Declaration of Independence, we're endowed by our Creator.
Yes.
With certain inalienable rights. And then also the Texas Constitution. The preamble of it says, humbly invoking the blessings of Almighty God.
Yes.
So clearly these were the values that were founded on, but they want to separate God from government.
Yes.
That's their goal. And in fact, I think really their goal is to try to make government like God. That's what the left wants to do.
Yes, that is what that's what they want. They
saw it in
want
COVID.
Yes.
We saw that in COVID.
We did. We absolutely did.
Closing churches, was on their
Close
agenda.
the churches and rat on your neighbors.
Yep.
That's
and close small businesses and say you don't deserve the right to make a living and feed your family. And, of course, we saw radical unions side with them in that and say schools needed to continue to be closed. And we know that's not what's best for children.
Right.
They need in-person learning and to be around their peers. And unfortunately, a lot were denied that for too long.
Yeah, and we're seeing the results of that.
We're seeing the consequences of that still today in our schools.
That's right. Well, thank you so much for leading that battle on behalf as a mom with children in a classical charter school, where that we do talk about the foundations of our nation. We do, not as a proselytizing, but as a cultural and historical document. These are necessary for our children in public schools. I say that because this should be taking place in every public school, and yet it is the left that is constantly trying to fight and claim that what happened historically, what happened to set America up to be great, never existed. And that's a huge problem that you've been at the forefront of leading in the legislature as a representative and now as a senator, and that more Texans need to understand that this is all happening while they're burying you in debt.
And in Texas, we are not going to bend to the radical left's delusions.
That's right.
Whether that's gender ideology or the atheist agenda that they're trying to push into our government and into our schools.
That's right. Something else that you're leading on is taxpayer friendly, which is obviously when someone is in need of assistance and ensuring that children's bellies are full and that kids go to school if their parents can't afford and need help with food sources. But something that this has really grown into this massive boondoggle, for a lack of better words, where big industry has figured out how to make accessible to those that are using government assistance for food to get candy and soda and all of the unhealthy aspects of treats and snacks that kids, while could be a treat, should not be fed every day. So talk about that and why is it important? And I don't think anybody's going to be surprised who's fighting against you on it.
Oh, yeah. It's common sense, right? I mean, the food stamp program is supposed to be about nutritious food essential to health and well-being. Well, it's not to shock anyone on the show. There is waste, fraud, and abuse, right, in our food stamp program. We know this. So this session, I passed a bill that kicks soda, sweetened beverages, and candy out of our taxpayer-funded food stamp program because is candy or soda nutritious and essential to health and well-being? Clearly, it is not. And the other thing that we know is taxpayer-funded junk food turns into taxpayer-funded healthcare, period. In this session, we actually saw the American Heart Association oppose that bill. And the big soda lobby oppose this bill. And I'm not sure about you, but since when is soda and candy heart healthy? When did that happen?
That's wild. So let me ask you this.
They changed their position later after a lot of pressure. After how ridiculous it was. Actually, RFK called them out over it because obviously this is part of the Make America Healthy Again agenda. And it was shocking to a lot of us that they were willing to go that far and oppose this bill that clearly is going to keep people healthy by taking soda and candy out of the food stamp program.
Any chance that those lobbying for the American Heart Association are also taxpayer-funded lobbyists?
They probably are. I'll tell you this. They definitely have the same ideology where they represent the radical left.
That's wild. And what was their excuse? Why should taxpayers be paying for Sour Patch Kids and Skittles and Coca-Cola?
They had an excuse that essentially that it was racist.
What?
That's really what the argument boiled down to, is that we were limiting people's choices. So no, we're not limiting anyone's choices. You can do whatever you want with your own money, but this is taxpayer dollars. And we need to make sure that the purpose of the program is the reason that it's being put into action and why it continues to exist, which is nutritious food essential to health and well-being. Clearly, we're not meeting that mission by allowing soda and candy to be eligible expenses.
Yeah.
But then yet they opposed it.
That is crazy, but it does go into this ever-growing bureaucracy, government, and all the many bureaucracies that are constantly looking for ways to take more tax dollars from taxpayers, from Texans, and utilize it in oftentimes their pet projects, utilize it. That's just buying votes to me. I'm sitting here thinking about it. When you said that they called it racist, I'm like, where are we going with this? Why are we telling? They're essentially trying to buy votes. Yes?
The left, anytime they don't like something, they call it racist.
Right.
So they called school choice racist, even though we're giving a chance, an educational option to families that can't afford it right now. And as we've seen in other states, it is mainly minority families that are taking advantage of the school choice programs. It's actually the opposite of racism. It's actually opportunity, which is what our nation was founded on. We were founded on equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome.
That's right.
Quality of outcome is socialism. And with school choice, what we're trying to do is give families that opportunity, but their response to that was it's racist.
Right. Because that's a catch-all.
Ridiculous.
Right.
Ridiculous.
Right. How absurd. That is just utterly nonsense. Okay, so we know that taxpayer-funded lobbyists are what are stopping or even tweaking. Something that I want to talk about real quick that Texans may not realize is when you see on the news or on social media where there's a bill that's moving through, and obviously it has to go back and forth between chambers.
The House, Senate, yes.
Because representatives should be representing those who sent them there. But what people may not realize is that when a bill actually gets to the finish line, usually goes to conference, these taxpayer-funded lobbyists are in there, and they're making...
Yeah.
They're giving the guidance. They're making the little tweaks, right? They're scurrying around the Capitol. They're going to the offices. They're sending the text messages. They're taking people out to dinner to make the tweaks. So a lot of times when legislation comes out and it's not what you expected, it's not what Texans have asked for, is that one of the things that is going on? Kind of explain that process again to reiterate why so many policies that matter to all Texans, but particularly to those that feel like they're further away from Austin and they can't get here, how that this happens where that they're like, I wasn't expecting that. I didn't think that bill would look quite like that, or it doesn't do the purpose that we've been told. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the bottom line is the taxpayer-funded lobbyists are going to oppose conservative legislation at every stage, whether that's from introduction all the way to implementation, like my chaplain's bill that is law. And they were essentially opposing the implementation of it because it required school districts to vote whether or not to allow volunteer chaplains. These aren't paid. Volunteer chaplains. No, we're not going to allow volunteer chaplains. So I'm curious to see, their guidance on prayer, because that is volunteer prayer. You're not making anyone pray.
Right.
You have to sign a consent form. And are they going to support or oppose volunteer prayer in our schools? It'll be interesting to see once that happens. But at every single stage of the process, they will work tirelessly with their own tax dollars to defeat conservative legislation.
Right.
And it doesn't matter where it is in the process, and they will load the Capitol down. And you think about the magnitude of this, it's about $100 million a year. $100 million a year. That's a lot of money spent on lobbyists that are stalking the hallways and trying to stop these bills that we need in Texas, and to make sure that we remain the most exceptional state in the nation, which we are, and we always will be as long as we fight to keep it.
That's right. And to tie this back to what else is going on, because Governor Abbott put out the call for a special session, which is exciting to see that he did load it up. He loaded it up with a with a lot of good stuff. To tie this into what we're seeing taxpayers care about, Texans care about really the most, because you feel it every single day when you're having to make a choice between signing your child up for that extracurricular activity, paying for food, or paying the light bill, or whatever it is. It's the way that they're in there, and they want to stop. The taxpayer-funded lobbyists are using your money, your tax dollars, to stop property tax reforms. And I wanted to bring it back to that because I remember after the fourth special session when we were trying to pass education savings accounts back in 2023, and when it didn't pass, I just thought, these people are crazy. The governor has said he's going all in. He's going to throw down the gauntlet and come out. And he meant it, man. But at that moment, before we saw him crisscross the state with great conservatives saying we're going to empower parents, I thought, why are they not doing this? And I went back and I started pulling the taxpayer-funded lobbying to see who was talking to who and who had relationships to who. So you always go back to the money. And what I also saw, because earlier in that session, y'all had given, it was considered historic property tax relief. You voted
2023,
$18 billion of property tax relief. What Texans may not realize is that y'all did, the state leaders, yourself included, gave this relief. But while y'all were doing this, the architecture, engineering, and consulting crews were working to push bonds in the November election. So 5 months after y'all passed historic and gave $18 billion property tax relief, the cartel, the profiteer class, went out for $34 billion in bonds. They got $28 billion. That was in November of 2023. 6 months later, in May, they went out for nearly $15 billion more dollars, got another 10. 6 months later, they've gone out for billions more. 6 months later, which brings us to this cycle, May of 2025, they got $41.3 billion passed. The property tax relief that y'all work so hard to give Texans is gone because of the locals that continue to work with the profiteers, which includes the taxpayer-funded lobbyists, to obscure what's going on and, quite frankly, use deceptive marketing practices. It's for the kids. It's always for the kids.
They say that the language at the bottom of the ballot is not accurate. It says this is a property tax increase. It is. Every bond is a property tax increase because either one of two things could have happened. Either without the bond, the tax rate wouldn't have gone up, or without the bond, the rate would have gone down.
That's right.
So either way, it is a tax increase. And we've seen this again and again where they're calculating actually the amount of compression. And compression is the amount that the state is putting in to lower your rate. Your M&O, maintenance and operation tax rate for your school district. They'll look at that and then they'll run the numbers and say, well, we can issue that much over here on the INS side, which is the local debt side,
yes,
and keep the rate the same and claim we didn't raise taxes. When the reality is all the money that the state put in to lower the taxes gets eaten up immediately, and you would have had a tax cut but for all that debt being added to the district. And their taxpayer-funded lobbyists are helping ISDs do this and assisting them in ways to defeat the property tax relief that we pass here in the legislature.
They are, because many of the taxpayer-funded lobbyists also lobby for the architecture, engineering, and construction firms. So that is all verifiable. They have their lobbyists as well, and they just so happen to also represent a huge swath of Texas communities. And so, again, you can't do both. And they are money motivated.
That's what they're doing. Conflict.
It's a massive conflict of interest constantly, and this is what we're seeing. I wanted to just hammer that home because I'm watching online. I'm watching this massive push to end taxpayer-funded lobbying, and I'm watching as Texans are saying, yeah, but. And the yeah, but is we need property tax relief, and it's really, really important that Texans understand you got to do both. You got to do both because it is these lobbyists that are representing these entities that are coming into your communities. They're buying dinners. Look, they buy dinners and say, community, come and see how we can do stamped concrete and bricked lined gorgeous football stadiums and massive this. And it's for the children, don't you know? And so has it over there. They are the ones, and they're paying the taxpayer-funded lobbyists to fight against the taxpayers and the ability to lower property taxes. And the great relief that Governor Abbott and all of those in the Senate and all of those legislators that are constantly working to give back, they are already trying to. It's like the Hungry Hippo. Did you play that when you were little?
Yeah.
That
you hit
game.
the little
it's like,
lever. Yeah,
yes, you hit the lever,
ball.
and it's like every single bit of property tax that y'all, they're just ready to eat it up.
Yeah, and look, you got to think of it this way too, where they're fighting to spend our money, right?
Yes.
They're lobbying with our own dollars against us to spend more of our money.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, which is not for the kids, by the way, at the same time, they're fighting against A through F, right? And so that is just disclosing to parents how a school district or a campus is doing.
Yeah.
So they're using your tax dollars, millions of dollars of it, to hire law firms, which are preferred vendors usually of taxpayer-funded lobbyists like TASB, to sue to conceal, even worse, the results of how a particular campus or school district is doing and hide those results from the moms and dads of Texas. I mean, so that really shows you which side they're on, and it's not on the sides of parents and kids.
No, it's not on the side of parents and kids. And equally as bad, I remember being told that they want these indicators, which they call, which outside of my kid knowing great history and why America's exceptional, math, reading, great literature, they want to put in indicators, right? And I will never forget when I was told some of these lobbyists, including at TASB, were advocating to put in a body mass index metrics into the accountability system. And I just had this horrible feeling. I have 2 daughters. I know you have 1. I thought, I cannot even, how would you even do that? Absolutely not. But also, what are you going to do? Go and squish my child's stomach and be like, oh, you're fat, or what? Like, what is wrong with you people? It's nuts what they're trying to do. To hide the banana is the best way I put it. They don't want parents to know, is this school teaching your children to read? Is it teaching them to do math? And that is something that they are well skilled at doing, is trying to hide and obfuscate and spend taxpayer dollars, because the people that paid for that lawsuit against us to be able to see were tax dollars.
That's right. And I know it won't surprise anyone listening to this show, but TASB, in their statement of beliefs, this is their statement of beliefs, so it's sort of like their constitution for their group, has DEI and CRT.
That's right.
Supporting diversity, equity, inclusion, and critical race theory is in their statement of beliefs. I mean, that is equality of outcome.
Right.
Which is socialism. It's not about opportunity when you stand for that. And to say that they support a policy that, a child can be racist just because of the race that they're born is outrageous. Mm-hmm. It's outrageous. That's what systemic racism is.
That's what it is.
Is that you could be born racist.
Right.
And have a taxpayer-funded lobbying group that claims to represent our schools believing in that is outrageous, and it's exactly why we need to ban this practice in Texas.
Absolutely. Well, Senator, thank you for being a leader for parents. You are really at the forefront of listening to constituents. That's the thing that I'm so grateful, because you truly are listening to what Texans are saying we want, not what's going on in the lobby, not what's going on in politics even. You're listening to Texans. All of the issues that we've discussed today mean so much to the great people of Texas. Before we wrap up, I want you to look in that camera, and I want you to reiterate once again why it is so important that we end the abhorrent practice of taxpayer-funded lobbying, and what Texans can hope to see once we do that. Lower property taxes, more accountability, more transparency. Tell them why this is an issue that should matter to every single Texan.
So taxpayer-funded lobbying is the unethical practice of your own tax dollars being used to lobby against you. They lobby against border security, against election integrity, against property tax relief. They even lobby to get boys into girls' restrooms and locker rooms and showers. And the reason why I take this fight on as the first fight every single session, it's the first bill that I always file. This is the toughest fight in Austin. And the reason why that is it defunds the deep state. It drains the swamp. It ends the USAID of Texas. And this is how the deep state operates with your own tax dollars to oppose your values. And I'm sick and tired of taxpayers' own dollars being used to lobby against them and lobby against the values that they believe in. Elected representatives represent you. We don't need some kind of middleman between your local government and your state government. It is waste. It is fraud, it is abuse, and it has to end in Texas.
Senator, thank you for taking on this battle for every single Texan that is sick and tired of feeling like their voice is stifled by the profiteers and the lobbyists that are up at the Capitol. Thank you for joining us today on Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin, and now you have the power.